Hey guys, this is Eric Vento with Government to Private. This is yet another episode where we talk about the transition from the public to the private sector. All of these are made for one reason and one reason only, which is to give you as much information as possible about a variety of different people's journeys so you can make the most informed decision possible about your own transition. What may work well for one person may not work well for you, but the purpose of this is really to give you a sense of all of these different perspectives and the different journeys, and really to tell you that the journey from the corporate world or to the corporate world from the government sector, there's so many ways to get there, and one of the purposes of these podcasts is to reinforce that. So with us tonight, we have Richard. Richard and I have known each other for quite a few years, although we've never met in person, which I consider one of the greatest travesties of our time. And that just goes to show you that, in this networking journey, that you can meet so many great people and build solid relationships with them, but yet never meet in person. And so, it's funny. We should definitely laugh about it, but he's definitely brought value to my life. And I'm thrilled that he is on the podcast with us tonight. Richard, welcome.
Yeah, no, thanks, Eric. Glad we're able to get together tonight.
Absolutely, brother. We can't get together in person, even though we live in the same city, but we can get together here.
It's like a long distance relationship, like back in the day.
Exactly. I love it. Well, hey, brother, let's go ahead and jump in. So I'd love just to hear a little bit about your background at a high level, where you worked in the government sector, how long you did it for, what you really enjoyed about it, and then we'll jump into the transition.
Yeah, no worries. So, after high school, I went to the Marine Corps, did that for about 4 years. Most of my time was overseas. Got out of the Marines, I needed a job, so I joined the Texas Department of Public Safety, the state troopers, and obviously everybody has to do highway patrol. I ended up doing 16 years with them, and serving in different capacities. So I was, besides highway patrol, I was in the Governor Protective Detail as an agent. That seemed appealing. It was one of my favorite jobs. I was in CID at the state capitol, so a little different than CID in the field, working narcotics. So I was actually doing infrastructure protection and terroristic threat type cases. And then my last assignment was a lieutenant over the technology unit. So where security and technology intersect, whether it be, video management systems, IP cameras, hidden cameras, TSCMs, drones. And so that's, that was my 16-year career with the Marines. I got out of the Marines with DPS. I got out of DPS and got onto the private sector about 3 years ago.
Awesome. And what was your favorite aspect about working for DPS? Like, I'm sure it's not just one, but when you look back over your career at multiple job levels and multiple units, what do you consider like some of your fondest memories?
I think it was the brotherhood, honestly. You have that camaraderie of kind of going through the suck together, and trusting each other to certain capacities, and whether you're kicking in doors or working the border ops, I do miss that. That's something that, definitely I look back on fondly. And I also kind of liked, I don't want to say the righteousness of law enforcement, but you kind of felt like at some times you were making a difference, maybe not all the time, but sometimes I felt like I was making a little bit of difference in what I was doing. And that brought some value too.
Yeah, I get asked quite a bit if I miss law enforcement, and the answer is overwhelmingly yes. If you know my story, you know that I didn't transition voluntarily out of law enforcement, and so there's a lot of things that I regret. But one of the things that I loved about working in law enforcement was the tangible impact of your actions. Like, just giving someone a ticket, could alter the course of their entire day. Removing an abusive person from a household, alters the course of that entire day, alters the course of so many different people's lives, and so many of the actions that we take in law enforcement without even thinking about it, especially when you're on the streets in a patrol capacity and you're going from call to call to call, or you're operating in a proactive mode. Every single action has in my opinion, a significant after effect. Maybe me pulling up to a convenience store and going inside and getting a drink, like now I'm showing a visibility in the area. You know, like you just never know what the effect of your actions are or were. And I just really miss that because
Right.
you could see that tangible impact every single day. And man, I just loved it because it gave me such a sense of what I'm doing is, you know, what you said, righteous, or what I'm doing is really making a difference, you know, and you know, I get asked all the time, how do you define that difference in law enforcement? How do you define it? And I'm like, what do you mean? Every single day you're making a difference. You know,
Yeah.
the struggle is obviously putting that on paper, you know, but I mean, I just love that aspect, and it still like brings goosebumps to me when I think about it. So, um, you know, you said you served 16 years with DPS. When did you start getting the feeling that it was time to transition out?
Well, it's kind of looking at how many years I'd have to do with the state because I joined EPS young. I was like 22 years old. And basically, I needed to do at least 31 years of service to get my 100% retirement. And I was like, man, do I really want to do 31 years for the state? Or do I want to maybe get some experience from the state and make the jump to the private sector, right? So I think it was I think it was about year 6 or 7. I was in the governor detail. I was really enjoying that aspect of law enforcement and executive protection and the traveling and kind of seeing the value and meeting a lot of other security managers from these different venues that we would go to. And I was like, man, this is something where I can see myself in a few years, and maybe not when I'm 50, maybe when I'm like 38 or 40. And so I kind of knew early on in my career. I didn't obviously jump at 6 or 7 years. I positioned myself over the next several years for that jump. It wasn't just because when I left the department at 16 years, I don't have a pension coming, right? I can't touch my retirement until I'm 57. So I got another like 16 years before I can start drawing a partial retirement. So I knew I had to be smart and tactical with my decisions as to when to leave, what income do I have in, and how could I survive for the next 16 years so my government benefits kick in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, how did you start to prepare for that transition? What resources did you utilize? How did you start to mentally map out what it was going to look like?
I first thought I knew what I was doing, and using my military resume or a resume that I Googled online, thinking, oh, this is fine, this should be sufficient, and they're going to see that I was a special agent, and they're going to be crawling and trying to hire me on the spot. Crickets. No one cares about that, and they don't understand it, and it didn't catch anybody's eye. Um, and so, obviously, as through the rejections of going from the government to private sector, I learned how to better market myself and learn what they were looking for. But it took several years to learn that. I knew that they were looking for people with degrees. Certain jobs did, right? So I would get beat out by someone with a master's or a bachelor's. So at 30 years old, I went back to school and got my bachelor's degree, right? And I was like, well, they asked, so you're going to get it in criminal justice? And I said, well, and that would be obvious if I wanted to stay in law enforcement, but I don't want to stay in law enforcement. I want to do something
Right.
else. So I did political science, right? But I mean, there's so many different things. Heck, you can get a degree in English or a business degree, and that would be better serve you in the private sector than a criminal justice degree would have. So I got my political science degree in my undergrad. So I was going to Texas A&M full time during the day, and then I was working back in highway patrol at night as a trooper for 3 years
That's a
straight.
tough schedule, man.
Now, I feel like I aged, right? And so for 3 years, and then if I was FTOing somebody, they were on straight nights. They already knew for the next 3 months, dude, you're on nights, which is cool because you have a different clientele that comes out at night. But
Yep.
man, it's rough. But I ended up getting the bachelor's, and then I followed through and got a master's. And that I knew would make me more marketable. But there's other things that I did to prep, right? Besides the resume and the degree, was the networking. Talking to people like yourself, going to these different conventions and security trade shows. It was extremely eye-opening to see what was out there, and realizing how small we really are and how insignificant we really are. If, sometimes I don't want to say we overinflate our worth, but coming from the government, we're big shots, right? But going to the private sector, you're towards the bottom of the totem pole, at least starting off, until you prove your worth.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that one. And it's all about perspective. Like when I transitioned out, I didn't know my worth. I didn't know how to translate it. I didn't know how to articulate it. And so I took a job at Capital One doing, AML fraud investigations, made less there than I did as a cop,
Wow.
significantly less, and I think I made like $50,000. And I was just like, what am I doing? But it was the only thing I could find because I didn't know how to sell myself.
Mhm.
And I think that there's this misconception that exists in transitioning law enforcement, military, and government professionals. I know this because I hear it all the time, is that, well, I need to start over at the bottom. And that is unequivocally not true, because you have experience, you have fantastic experience that corporations and organizations want. It just needs to be put in a language that they can understand, and so, you know, um, you know, that was a very eye-opening experience for me. And, going to GSX, that's sponsored through ASIS International on multiple occasions, and seeing the thousands and thousands of security professionals that appear from all over the world, and just realizing like, wow, there's this whole other world that I really didn't know existed, and so I definitely agree with you on that one.
Yeah, GSX and ISC West are the two conferences I try to make every year, and they have thousands of vendors there. So you get to see the cool technology that's out there. You could talk with them. And then they have training classes, little hour-long sessions on just about anything in the security field you can think of. And I've found great value. I've been going to these conferences since, pre-COVID. Obviously had to do them remote during COVID, but man, I look forward to those every year. So I get to meet new security professionals, and I get to, see the cool new toys and have great trainings and great lectures. So
Yeah.
definitely a step I would highly recommend for those transitioning, in addition to getting your resume reworked by someone like yourself that actually understands the verbiage and can put it into business terms.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you about because it's, the conferences and the courses and the vendors, it's like continuing education,
Right.
for the security professional. Like law enforcement, we have to do our 40 hours if you're in Texas, and we do the electives, we go other places depending on what we see. But that's not only to maintain our license, but it's also to keep us updated with what's going on in our respective fields, not only from a legal perspective, but also from others as well. And, what you mentioned is the exact same thing. If we stop learning, then we get stagnant. And it's the same thing from a security professional perspective. If you want to know what's going on in the world of security, and security is this massive buzzword that means a whole lot of different things. But understanding what's the newest technology coming out, how is that going to impact, A, B, C, and D? Who are the newest chief security officers? What are the newest companies offering? Like, there's so many startups out there nowadays, and different companies springing out of the woodwork to address different needs. And, it can get overwhelming. But, if you kind of stay in your own bubble and you don't expand your horizons, then it can be really easy to fall behind.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely great points.
So, okay. So talk to me about, that first job that you got out of law enforcement. Like, how did that materialize for you?
Yeah, so it wasn't the first one I applied to. It was probably like the 150th job I've applied to. I may not be the sharpest tool, but I have perseverance, right? And so after getting my resume done right and networking and just, applying to jobs and, optimizing the words in my resume, I finally got an interview with an LNG company here in Houston as a security coordinator. And I was like, heck, I'll take it. This is a foot in the door. And yeah, I went through the application process and the interviews, and it's not just one interview. That's one of the things too. Like in law enforcement, we just had the one panel interview that was like a stress interview. No, it's like 6 rounds of interviews, and you're not just meeting with, most of the people you're meeting with are not security people. They're like HR, other business units, IT, because they basically want to know, what can you bring to the table? What value do you bring that's going to help them, right? And are you compatible? Are you going to be rigid and not someone to work well with? And that's huge.
Yeah.
So I got on with that company, and I was with them for 3 years, for the last 3 years, and moved up, slowly went up the corporate security ladder. But I learned a lot. It has been one of the greatest experiences that I've ever had, because I learned what the private sector values versus what I thought I knew about the private sector working for the government.
So let's jump into that really quick. So what did you learn about the private sector and what it values? I know you kind of briefly touched on it, but like how did that kind of break apart your belief system prior to transitioning into it?
So I guess I had kind of alluded a little earlier about humility and knowing where you stand, right? So, going in there, you're thinking that you're hot stuff, you're career law enforcement or military, or, I've had guys who were CIA that worked with me, retired Secret Service guys. I was DPS, right? So we're going into an industry that doesn't understand that. They just think we're Allied Universal with a gun, maybe in plain clothes. That's what they think, and they don't understand the value of what we bring. And the other aspect of it is we have to understand what value do we really bring. I mean, I don't want to be known as the guns and guards and gates guy, right? I want to be the strategic thinker and planner, and actually have the bigger picture and speak their language. So like the key word or the key focus that I've found is risk, right? Risk reduction. What can I do to mitigate risk for the company? Because the company, they care about making money. And that's ultimately, this is not a charity. They want to make as much money as possible. And they don't want you to get in the way of that. So if you start implementing all these rules, to try to slow things down, and it slows down them making the money, then you're gone, right? Or they're going to tell you knock it off. And
Right.
unlike government, where you have the law book, right, the Texas law book with a penal code and CCP and all these things that you can enforce, and you have the full support of the state or the federal government behind you. So when you tell someone, you can compel them to do just about anything because you're representing the government and the law. It's not like that in the private sector. There's a few regulations they have to follow, but a lot of that stuff is suggestions that we have and policies that we write to convince them that it's valuable. Because if they don't see the value in it, they're not going to do it. And I can't strong arm them because they're just going to tell me to go pound sand. So I had to learn that. And thank God I kept my mouth shut for the most part. And learning to how to deal with the other business units, right? And when I first did stuff, I would just do something, and they're like, "No, you need to get with IT before you do that. You need to make sure Office Services is aware." I'm like, "For what? I mean, this shouldn't this be a call that I can make?" And they're like, "No, it's not. This is a team, and everything we do, you have to have the players involved, and they need to be on board. Because if you try to install this camera system without IT knowing, but we have to run it on an IT system, that's a no-no." And so you really have to, I don't want to say nurture, but you have to kind of build those relationships and maintain those with the other business units that have no idea what security is. And that was kind of what I did. Running I was running all the security projects for the LNG company for the last 3 years, whether it be pipeline stuff or at site, whether it be an office in London. I'd fly out there and design the system for cameras and card readers. I would do the security risk assessments every year, do executive protection as needed for the CEO. So a lot of flexibility that's required. One of my former coworkers called it the daily churn, right? You may have this list of stuff you want to do each day, but then there's the daily churn that comes you have to deal with. And, it may be an emergency to them. You may think, man, that they really blow this out of proportion, but to them, it's an emergency, and therefore you're going to treat it with the same emergence and importance. So, but it was a great learning experience, and definitely something that I was able to take from that into my new position.
Well, you definitely unpacked a lot in that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No. I love it. I mean, this is meant to be as valuable as possible. And so I'm going to turn this right back around on you. I'm going to put you on the spot here real quick. So, you mentioned, what the business wants and what the business values, and how that can differ significantly from working in the government, which, could care less about efficiency and, stuff like that. So when you talk about all of these projects that you managed and the access control, video management systems, surveillance, how do you quantify that? How do you quantify that on a resume? How do you articulate your value and your impact on paper that perhaps looks different from law enforcement?
Yeah, I guess I kind of look at it from the more the 30,000 foot view, right? So I helped manage programs that reduce risk for the company, right? Because that's what they understand. Companies understand they don't want to take high risk, they don't want to lose money, and they sure as heck don't want you spending money if possible. And unfortunately, it's a necessary evil for corporate security to spend money. We don't generate any income. We just cost them. So I have to show the value of them investing that 100,000, that $1 million in my team. And this is what I was able to produce for you. I was able to use this access control program to minimize intruders coming in or detect them before they could have damaged the plant, right? And because of that, we use these analytics. So you kind of have to do it from that perspective. It's kind of hard to sell something that didn't happen. But if you look at everything from risk reduction and use that as the hub, and kind of using that as you're trying to not impede business, right? And you're trying to reduce the risk the company's taking on. And those are the programs that you'd want to build out or be part of. That's the way that they understand it, and the way that you're going to get the yes instead of the no.
Love it. Speaking my language, brother. That's what I talk about every single day to people, is articulating value. And I one really good example that I bring up pretty significant, or not significantly, consistently for individuals in law enforcement is, I bring up that corporate resumes are usually made up of a combination of metrics and stories. And so a metric would be oversaw a $500,000 budget, managed 15 direct reports, something like that. A story would be, what was the problem? How did you address it? And then what was the quantifiable impact to the organization, the customer, et cetera? And when people ask me like, well, how do I do that for law enforcement? I'm like, well, say you have a high crime area. You utilize data analysis to identify, hey, we're seeing a high rate of vehicle break-ins in this one area. You put together a crime prevention plan. You implement it over a given time period, and then you see a 3-month drop in motor vehicle break-ins over 50%. That's a really simplistic example of how to do it, but it works. And it's the same thing in the private sector. Is a lot of times organizations struggle with white noise from an alarm management system. They have, when I worked at Dell, they had millions and millions of alarms that were happening every single week, from door forced open, door held open, a lot of critical alarms that always went unanswered just because we didn't have the manpower to deal with it, until we put together we overlaid that system with an artificial intelligence system that reduced our alarms almost 85% overnight, and allowed us to focus in on the technology that we needed to repair, the parts that we needed to replace, and it enabled us to funnel the truly critical alarms directly to a human response, and that reduced, our alarm management by millions of dollars annually, with minimal upfront costs by implementing that artificial intelligence system. So it's like, you're not expected to know how to do all this coming out of law enforcement or the government. It's not like no one's giving you a guidebook, but you do have to think about, well, what have I accomplished? If I've only done investigations, how many of those have I done? What investigations have I done that the corporate sector cares about? Have I conducted an internal employee misconduct? Have I done fraud, workplace violence, violent crime, the program manager aspect, what programs have I managed for the police department? Have I fundraised? Have I managed community outreach programs? Like, once people start to really dig down to the nitty gritty of what have I actually accomplished, they start to realize, man, I've actually done quite a lot. I've just never known that this had value beyond the walls of the PD.
Exactly. And it's nice to have, a lot of the resume companies these days, these services, it's not just let me pay $100 online and have them fill in the blank. You're actually going to have conversations with real people to help articulate that, right? They may ask, hey, explain to me what you did, or send me your last 2 years performance evals, and then you help. The nice thing is these resume companies will help articulate that for you, right? And they may ask those pointed questions. Hey, what happened when you did this? When you took over this unit, did the productivity go up? Was it the same? Did it go down? Okay, good. We had an increase in productivity, a reduction in turnover. So, you don't have to be necessarily the expert in articulating it, but it's good to think about that. And so when you're meeting with these resume companies, it'd be a lot easier to put that on paper and transition. And also, one of the things I note is, you're going to be asked about this during the interviews. So, you may put it on paper, but they may ask, hey, give me a situation where you used, flexibility, or give me a situation where, where you use your leadership skill. And so you kind of have to think about those things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And God, I love talking about this, but because I think people, they think that what they have to offer, nobody wants, and that could not be further from the truth.
Right.
And the more that we can get that message out there, the more that we can bring awareness to that simple fact, the better off that more people will be when they consider the transition process. So as we start to wrap up, what advice would you have for people who are in the transition process now, or considering that, dipping their toes in the water and starting that push?
Gotcha. Yeah, there's a few things that I would consider that I've done that I've found success in, and there's some things that I've done I've had no success, so I wouldn't recommend those. Obviously, we talked about the resume. The networking is huge, right? That humility of, I don't know private sector, I don't know this industry. I may be really good at what I used to do, but having that humility going in to be a lifelong learner, I think that attitude will serve you very well no matter what industry you get into. Talked about attending the conferences, GSX, ISC West, great value in that. There's also different certifications in the private sector you could look at getting, right? ASIS has some, the CPP and the PSP, ISC West, they have their association that will do like the certified security project manager certification, or you can just do a generic PMP, right? Project management professional at a community college right now. That's something the private sector understands that would teach you some of the steps that go into managing projects. So there's a lot of different continuing education out there. Just kind of look at things that you think the private sector would value. And that's the things I would pursue in your transition.
Awesome. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think, what's important to note is that, just as we kind of alluded to in the beginning of this, is that there's so many different ways to exit the private sector. God, the public sector. That's why I just need to go to bed. I'm just tripping all over myself tonight.
No,
but so many people that I talk to, they're like, "Well, I've only done investigations, so I should probably do that." And I'm like, "Why?" Investigations are diverse. It involves a lot of different hard and soft skills, and there is so much to do in the private sector that most people just don't know about. And so when I'm having a call with a potential client and they're like, what are my next steps? I never talk up those calls as a sales call. It's always, tell me what you're struggling with. What do you want to do? And let me provide some constructive feedback, because a lot of people don't need a resume, or they may not need one right now. They need to figure out, what do I want to do? Or they need to talk to a lot of different people. And that's what I recommend that everyone do, because besides the time that you're spending, it's free. You can have all of these conversations with a wide variety of people and really learn what happened in your transition, what went well, what didn't go well. Do you like working for the company that you're at? What's up with work-life balance? I hear that all the time. Or, what's your culture like? What is, what benefits? What about compensation? Like, I've never had to negotiate my salary before. What's up with that? Like, how do I even do that? There's so many aspects to the private sector that are just almost foreign to people coming out of government, because in a lot of ways, the government is so black and white. We know what we're going to do. We know what our how much we get paid. We know what our benefits are. Everything, nothing is in the gray area for the most part, and the corporate sector seems to live in the gray area, and so it can be really, really helpful just to talk to other like-minded professionals, especially people who have a similar background to you, and just understand that, like, hey, all these other guys have done it. I can do it too. And I just think that, beyond the knowledge that you gain, that it's also just a super encouragement, to those individuals. And I know when I transitioned out, talking with people who, had a less than ideal transition out of law enforcement, or even the guys who, retired after 30 years, the transition is still going to be a shock. Whether you think you're prepared for it or not, it's still going to be a shock. And the more that we can bring awareness to that, I think that hopefully people will make fewer mistakes than we did.
Absolutely.
Any other words of wisdom?
One thing I did notice, which I thought was kind of odd, because like I said, I was with DPS 16 years, and it's kind of like, with the government, it's kind of like that old school mentality of you're going to stay with this company for extended time, and you may even retire from them, right? And the private sector, it's not really like that. It's not uncommon to jump around from company to company every 2 to 3 years, which is crazy to me. I'm like, what? I mean, does it not hurt your resume? No, actually, it does the opposite, because a lot of times, if you desire to promote up, there may not be a whole lot of opportunities in company A. So you may get as much experience here, and then you would jump up to the next company for a promotion, which is what I just recently did. And then, last week, I'm in week 2 of a new job. And I was, with the last company 3 years. And so I'll do this for several years, so I get as much benefit out of it. Then I may jump to another company, who knows, but don't feel like you have to be committed to that company, that first job, for 20 or 30 years. Realistically, 2, 3, 4 years is probably your shelf life, if they don't get rid of you first because they want fresh blood. And then you'll take that great experience and apply it to another company and move up that way. That's just that was one of the different mentalities I had to get into, that I didn't understand coming into this.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really, really critical point, because I think, especially coming out of law enforcement and then especially the military, we have this deeply ingrained sense of loyalty, and we're very loyal to our jobs. We're very loyal to, the organization, and, the corporate world, if you've ever gone through a layoff or a termination or a RIF, as we call them, like a reduction in force, whatever fancy word you want to use for the situation where you no longer have a job, you realize really, really quickly that as much value as you thought you brought, the company just didn't have the same level of understanding that you thought they did. And it's a constant thing in the private sector where the business is going to do what's best for the business, and regardless of how valuable you think you are to them, you're not. And that's a really tough thing to understand. It's a tough thing to really accept, because I've been laid off multiple times. I've been on contracts. I've gotten laid off with thousands of other people, and it feels intensely personal, and it takes a while to get over that, but for the most part, 99% of the time, it's a business decision. There are no it's not personal. There are no politics, involved in your personal layoff, majority of the time. And I think it's just really important to recognize that, companies want you to give them 2 weeks notice, but if they let you go, they're not going to give you any notice.
Right.
And so you just have to figure out what's best for you and your family, and if that's staying at a company for 10 years because of whatever, or it's jumping around every 2 years because you want to progress further, or you want to get pay raises, or, whatever the case may be, it's no one's business but your own.
Exactly.
As long as you can deliver value, and as long as you can provide something of uniqueness to the company that you're working for, then, do your thing.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, that's not something that we've talked about previously, so I'm really grateful that we were able to bring that up. And it's kind of a taboo subject for a lot of people, just because it's not fun talking about that,
Right.
but it is a very real fact of working in the corporate world, and it's something that you should constantly be preparing for, because speaking from personal experience, no matter how well you think it's going, you may have just got a $15,000 bonus and had a, kick butt performance review, and then you get laid off the next week. Like, I'm not saying that happened to me or anything like that, but
That's where your network and comes in too, right? Because I remember, when I had a good friend of mine post that they got laid off from Dell, a year or two ago, and they're like, "Hey, network, I just got let go. I'm looking for other opportunities." And because you developed this over the years and you kept up with them, not just when you needed something, but you just genuinely wanted to be a good person and be that supportive person, they're going to say, "You know what? He helped me out. I'm going to help him out. Hey, I got this position coming open, or I know someone that does." So I cannot emphasize enough the value of maintaining those good relations and network. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I could easily spend the next 4 hours talking about, but what I'll close with is be intentional about your relationship building, and with the intention of not receiving anything in return, like relationships and building those relationships have paid, literally, it's been priceless for me in my career, but also in my personal life. And it's helped me with jobs, it's helped me with a myriad of other things. And we're not talking about spending your entire week getting to know people, but it's small steps. It's a call here and there, it's maintaining that relationship, it's being there when people need you, it's introducing people to your network, it's facilitating introductions, it's offering referrals, it's how can I help you, because you could just as easily be on the other end of that and need help from others. And we all hope that people will be there when we need them. So I know, like I said, I could talk about this forever. Something I'm intensely passionate about. But Richard, I really, really appreciate you agreeing to be here and sharing with us your story and your wisdom and your journey, because it is unique, and it's unique to you. And I really hope that as people listen to this, they get a sense of, man, that resonates with me, or like, I really, have been struggling with that. I'm going to reach out to Richard, or I'm going to reach out to Eric, I'm going to reach out to whoever, and just talk through this, because there's a whole army of people that have transitioned out before you. And whether you come from the intelligence community, the teaching classroom, whatever the case may be, there's someone out there who has gone through something similar to what you have, and we are here to help you. And so, Richard, again, thank you for joining us, and it was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, no, thank you, Eric. And you can look me up. I'll be happy to field any questions offline that you may have and guide you guys. So I definitely know, from perseverance that what works and what doesn't. I'll be happy to be a resource for you guys.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, brother. I hope you have a good night.
Y'all too. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Thanks.